Hey, what's up, guys? Swim here with a extremely unfortunate angle in the We Play Studios in Kiev. So they set me up in this little room. I don't have a ton of resources here, but I'm able to bring you a patch note analysis a day later than I would have liked to. But at least it gave me time to think about all the changes and make sure that I know exactly how I feel about everything. This is a really big update, and I plan on getting a little bit in depth with this stuff. So right off the bat, head-to-head, players are now paired off to fight directly against each other and both take part in the same shared combat. This is a really big improvement to the game. It's something that people have been saying for a long time. TFT has this. It's part of the reason that a lot of people like TFT. It's kind of the more popular game right now. And this is definitely helpful. Honestly, the ability to have boards fight directly against each other, it just feels better for new players. It feels better for like spectators for tournaments. I was casting like the day 2 after this patch dropped, and this was actually a really big help for the cast. It just made things a lot more cohesive. Takes a bit to get used to if you're already used to the old system, but it's more intuitive overall. The one downside is that it does technically increase variance. So I think that's something that can be maybe like decreased if you want to keep an even level in different ways. But that's easy to fix. That's not like hard at all. This is a good change. When an odd number of players are present, one of the players fights a clone of the actual player. And this is exactly the same process that happens in TFT. So basically, when you have like 7 players left, the player that doesn't have a pair to fight on their board will effectively just be fighting one of the random boards, a second board of one of the 6 other players. And it's just going to be like a phantom board that can't take damage but can deal damage, right? It's just the best way to do this. Leaderboard now pairs off players when they're in head-to-head combat. This is just like a UI change, basically. You'll see it in your game, but effectively, all this means is that you'll be seeing the leaderboard on the side just like match the players in the pairs based on the combat. Okay, new ranked system. So overall, I want to say I feel very good about this patch. I think this patch puts the game in a really good direction. This section here is probably the one thing that I really disagree with in terms of the direction of the game. I don't like the changes to the rank system. I think it doesn't really make too much sense. That being said, I'm pretty confident Valve will revert it, or maybe like do some kind of middle ground. Still not really sure, but basically how it works is now rank changes based solely on where you finish in a ranked match and does not depend on your opponent's rank. This, in my opinion, is actually kind of nonsensical. It is no longer an ELO-based system. Before it was some variation of Glicka, which was based on ELO, which effectively is the whole point of it is, your opponent's MMR score will influence how much you gain and lose. And right now, it effectively doesn't. So there's some downsides there. First off, it makes the amount of points you gain kind of a lot more based on variance, and also it kind of makes climbing a grindier process more rewarding to players that play more. I just don't really like this. I personally think it's a mistake. I've talked to a lot of other players who agree it's probably a mistake, and I don't really think they're going to be keeping this system moving forward. New casual player mode. You can play multiplayer games without affecting your rank, and you guys know what casual means. It's casual. It's like unranked, right? And this is nice for me personally because it means I can dick around without having to, make a Smurf, right? And it'll still be, based on your own skill level. So it's really nice. I don't really want to have to make a Smurf. I haven't really like played ranked seriously since I hit Lord. I've been kind of like dicking around, and it's like kind of annoying that like, I don't know. I mean, I have to like climb back up, or I have to make a Smurf, and this is a good change to both of those. Okay, ranked multiplayer mode update. Your rank, which is your score is used to find opponents. Again, it's just a replacement to the MMR system. This is just nothing. It is basically embedded into the rank system that we were talking about. I've covered basically all of this. Okay, So this is all visual. I added 2-star and 3-star look upgrades for the following heroes, and you'll be pretty safe in assuming that they're going to do this with every hero in the entire game. So when you make it 2-star, when you make it 3-star, all of these heroes and eventually all of the heroes in the game will have unique visuals for those unique tiers, which is something Auto just had, and it was very successful. It's just cool. It's just a visual upgrade. Nothing really gameplay related to breakdown. Now we get into the real meat and potatoes of the patch, because there's a lot to break down here. Okay, gameplay. Round damage eliminated for rounds 4 to 9. Round damage starts at round 11 at 2 damage and proceeds as before from then on. So basically how this works is effectively the only thing you need to know here is it's the same as before, except on round 4 to 9, you just lose 1 less health for getting killed in a board. Losing 1 board, you just lose 1 less health than before. That's the only difference, okay? And only on rounds 4 to 9. So basically it's a bit of a buff towards the idea of like lose streaking. But the best way to think about this change is it lowers your incentive a little bit in terms of playing for the board early, which means, for example, you'll see players do stuff like level a little bit later. We've been seeing in this WePlay tournament, a lot of players have leveled very slow compared to how they have in the past. You see a lot of players, a decent amount of players going to like level 6 on round 13 or something. Whenever a player loses a round against another player, the loser gains a free reroll the next round. This reroll is not stackable, so use it or lose it. Okay, so this is probably the single biggest change of the entire patch. It's very hotly contested. I think the knee-jerk reaction of a lot of people right away reading this is that this is OP, it's going to create lose streaking. I really like this change. I think it's phenomenal. I think it's pretty genius. I think that it has almost only upsides for the games. However, I could maybe see it being tweaked if it proves to need some kind of tweak. I think this makes the game healthy in a lot of ways. First of all, it is your kind of comeback mechanic. Like, you know, the TFT has like the carousel, Auto Chess has like a slightly higher degree of lose streaking and less health lost from losing. And now Underlords has this like reroll on loss, which, like I said, just makes perfect sense to me. So part of why I really like this, a very large part, is it increases the agency and skill of the game in the early game a ton, right? And this is really, really, really important. Basically, the way to think about this is you have so many more decisions in the early game because you see so many more shops. Stuff like overflowing your board, which is to say, like, you know, using, like, going up to like 9 out of 5 or whatever on your board and having a full bench and an overflowing board just to be able to kind of temporarily extend your bench capacity for a turn, and then like reselling down if you don't hit what you needed in the next shop, the natural shop, is a very powerful strategy. People were already doing it. It's going to be even more important now. So you'll see, you know, there's a lot of skill going into that, as well as just more decisions in the early game, right? It makes stuff like more economy-based strats a little bit better, and it means that in the early game, you really don't want to be necessarily going out of your way to try to win streak. I wouldn't say necessarily that you're incentivized to lose streak. I don't think that's really the correct way to look at it. However, when you are on a bad start, you definitely don't want to be putting your gold into stuff like leveling up when you'd rather play for bench and play for economy. The other big thing about this change is that it effectively increases the amount of average rolls you'll see in a game. This has a lot of implications. It actually really, really drastically changes the game. You see players are playing for interest a bit slower, not because interest is less valuable, but because you might have a bit more rolls early, which means you have more things to buy. You'll see players go for 3 stars a lot more often because you get a lot more free rolls, which means that strategies that scale off of roll value is really important. There's this concept in Underlords and all these TFT like auto battlers, which is basically the idea of the value, the mathematical value that you get per roll. And the fact that you now get about 10 free rolls in every game is absolutely huge. It means strategies that scale with this concept of roll value will get a really, really big boost. So stuff that goes for 3 stars is an example of that, but also the idea of maybe trying not to play for the same strategies that other people are playing for. You'll see in this patch, because players have free rerolls, I think it's more optimal to try more so than ever to avoid playing strategies that too many other players are playing. What I mean by this is specifically like if you see 2 or more players also on knights, I probably wouldn't go knights at that point, unless of course you had a really good start for it or you think one of them is going to move off of it, right? So you just get a lot of free rolls in every game. It's a really, really big deal. It's a very drastic change, and I think it's just a really, really great thing to have in the game. I personally think that it's possible. Some tweaks need to happen. For example, strategies that don't do very well with 3-star units feel like they're a bit weaker because of this, because everything that does well with 3-star units got quite buffed by this. But all they have to do is kind of like maybe buff up some of the 3 stars of other strategies or give them compensation in other ways, right? Or some people are saying, the rerolls are just too much. So I guess there's an argument to make this only happen for the first 10 or 15 rounds of the game, which I guess could be fine. We'll see. I mean, I think something like that could end up being tested or ultimately necessary. I don't think that's necessarily likely, but it could happen. Either way, this is a really good step forward for the future of the game, in my opinion. I see almost only upsides with this. Really, really great change. Okay. General fix solo games and tutorials. So this is mostly just like basically like bug fixes. Yep. This basically nothing really like nothing substantial here. One thing is they added an option defaults on to automatically deploy units from your bench if you ever in the board and combat begins before you have time to do so yourself. So for example, if you accidentally forget to put a unit on, it'll like default and automatically deploy a unit on your bench, right? You can turn this off in settings if you want to ever open fort or run less than the maximum amount of units, right? Otherwise, there's no reason to turn this off. Okay. Spectating is just like a little bit better. I really like that they added this to the game. This is actually something I was messaging Valve specifically about. Since I was casting this tournament, I was like, could you possibly just like add this to the game? It's a big tournament. It would be really nice if you could quickly throw it in there. And we see, they complied, which is really, really great. You love to see a game dev studio that's going to be, kind of responding and communicating well with their player base and their needs. Okay, hero changes. Crystal Maiden. So we got a bit of a nerf here, basically. It's a little bit healthier, which is nice, but it's a 3 cost instead of a 2 cost. Overall, a bit of a nerf, but Crystal Maiden is still kind of a fundamentally abusable hero. Right now, I'd say mages are not weak per se. You can still go them. I mean, the fact of the matter is, because you want to be building things that other people aren't building much of right now, everything is kind of viable, right? Because of that. So something like Crystal Maiden, that represents mages is still fine. I don't think mages are one of the strongest alliances, but they're fine, right? Crystal Maiden is a really great hero in scrappies. You can just run like 4 scrappies and just throw in a Crystal Maiden without even completing mages, and she's still going to be good in that too. You're pretty much never going to 3-star her anymore, though. I would say that's probably the biggest change of this. It's a lot more expensive and kind of harder. It's a bigger commitment to 3-star at 3 cost than a 2 cost, and you're going to be looking for really good payoff if you can do that, right? It's very possible, but it costs a lot more gold to make. It'll cost a total of 9 more gold, which is a lot at the end of the game, and it's going to be burning through your interest more aggressively too as you bench like these 3 costs instead of these 2 costs. Ultimately, probably cost you upwards of 10 golds, which probably isn't worth it in the case of Crystal Maiden. See Eidolons get rescaled. This change is going to make sense later when we talk about the primordial change. Juggernaut will only cast Blade Fury when he's surrounded by at least 2 enemies. This is a bit of a weird change. I think they're trying to make his AI a bit better because people were complaining that he spins when there's only 1 enemy around. But it doesn't seem like he really tries to walk into range of multiple enemies yet. So unless I'm mistaken, I don't think this really helps the hero too much. A lot of people are just saying his AI is like slightly awkward. There's a few things that could be improved a bit about it. We'll see. Ultimately, Juggernaut gets a buff indirectly further down. Lena gold cost changed from 3 to 2. So this is the swap with Crystal Maiden. They're maintaining parity. They swap a 3 for a 2, right? So there's not 1 more 2 cost or 1 more 3 cost. They just change spots. And she didn't get a stat change, which is a really big deal. So she just has like 3 cost stats at a 2 cost. Now she was kind of weak before, So I don't think this is a huge buff for mages, but it's definitely noticeable. I mean, if you 2-star Alina early, you're definitely thinking about going for a 3-mage splash. All right, next up, we got a bit of a Shadow Fiend nerf. Attack range changed from 4 to 3, and he loses some Requiem of Souls DPS. Projectile start with changes and projectile end with changes. I still haven't done like an analysis on how big of an impact the projectile end with change is, but ultimately Shadow Fiend is definitely a slightly weaker hero than before. Mostly because of a change that happens further down. At the end of the day, Shadow Fiend is still a strong hero. It's almost impossible for Warlock and Demon to be a weak combination. He has a powerful magic damage skill, makes him good as a splash because he's a demon. He's good in demons, he's good in mages, he's good in like Warlocks. He's still a good hero, but he feels definitely less like OP for sure. Okay, so we see Venomancer getting scaled down basically, and effectively in the form of this. So 3-star Venomancer is only 1 ward now. Funnily enough, the 2-star Venomancer actually gets better because it's still 1 ward, but you can see here its stats are better. So 3-star Venomancer is worse, but 2-star is better. I think that, you know, if you have like a Savage or Summoner path, something with, for example, Summoning Stone, or, you know, Toothing Claw doesn't exist anymore, so there's not too much of a reason to do that. Spoiler, by the way. But effectively, if you have something with Summoning Stone, it can be worth it to level Venomancer to 3-star. Otherwise, I don't think there's necessarily too much of a reason to try to go for it super aggressively. Venomancer 3-star was something that has been pretty powerful for the past week. And this is a big nerf to it, right? So ultimately, yeah, it's something you can 3-star in certain situations. 2-star Venomancer is still very good. In fact, it's even better, but it's not really what you want here. Witch Doctor, Paralyzing Cask gets a bit of a bump. Cooldown change from 10 to 15, making it, if anything, even a little bit more reliant on Octarine Essence. So this is a... I don't know if I'd say it's a big deal, but it definitely does hurt the hero in a notable way. Witch Doctor has been a pretty outstanding Warlock. Just the ability to get that, like, you know, effective, almost like AoE stun is pretty great. A lot of people have been playing him in this tournament. He's a really, really great Warlock. And I think this, like, fairly... I wouldn't even say this is a small nerf. This is a notable nerf, because often 10 was just like kind of the perfect time to align, you know, into... a really powerful second ult to clean up a fight, and also it makes it Octarine in essence puts us to 5, which is nuts. This notable nerf I think is warranted. Like it's again mostly a hit to Warlocks in general. So here next up we have maybe the single biggest like area of changes after the free rerolls, which is alliance items have been disabled. So global items still exist, but alliance-specific ones don't. I want to mention very specifically, Fall from Grace and Summoning Stone, even though they are high synergies, still exist. These are not technically alliance items. Fall from Grace was never like an alliance global item. It just had the ability to turn one alliance into another, so that's still in the game. Basically, most of them are deleted, while a lot of them are basically just like relegated to different areas of the game, and we'll kind of get into what that means. So for example, we see a few new items. Helm of the Undying has the effect of the old Warrior Unstoppable Alliance perk. So this is equipped hero survives for an extra 4 seconds after receiving a killing blow. This is a fairly powerful item. It's pretty good. I would say it's the second best out of the new items. I don't think it's like super OP, but it's good. This is a solid item you can pick up. Just being tier 2 means there's a lot you can do with this one. And basically putting it on a hero that's just like very valuable, putting it on like an early Bloodseeker, putting it on like an early Slark, putting it on something like a Shadow Fiend, maybe in mages something like a Keeper of the Light, something that wants to be able to stay alive for a little bit longer to finish channeling a big spell, or a huge DPS that ramps up like Bloodseeker or Slark will be able to kill a few additional units. You can also put it on like a front line that you need to survive to cast a spell. So that would be something like a level 1 Disruptor would be a good candidate for Helm of the Undying. Until you get Disruptor to level 2, you can pop this on your Disruptor to make sure it gets off Static Storm, because usually you would normally need it to be level 2 to be able to have enough health to get enough mana to cast its ulti as a frontliner. Because units that have big early spells like Disruptor really want to be frontliners, but don't until they're level 2 normally have enough health to tank that much. Okay. Next up, Bracers of Desperation. So this is really powerful. This is the Final Flash reincarnated into an equipment, and most importantly, this is not restrictive to mages. So equipped hero resets their cooldown and gets full mana when below 30% health. Attack target's magic resistance is reduced by 30%. This is straight up a refresher orb. It's worse than Refresher Orb in one way, in that it needs to get below 30% health, and it's better than Refresher Orb in two ways, in that it gives you full mana, and that whenever you attack, the target gets lowered magic resistance. I don't actually know the duration of this. I assume it's probably the same as Blightstone, comparable to Robe of the Magi, which was an item in Dota Auto Chess. So I would guess it's like a 3-second non-stackable but applicable debuff. Anyway, this item is crazy. I would say it's better than Helm of the Undying. Both are pretty powerful, but Bracers of Desperation I think is fairly nuts. Again, it's like a tier 3 refresher. In some ways, it's better than a refresher. Being able to put it on like a frontline lone druid in the early game is nuts. You can sometimes get like an early lone druid being level 2 on druids on like round like 13, not even super hard. Bracers of Desperation on 15, and you're just going to win like almost 10 free rounds. I'm obviously exaggerating a little bit, but it's very, very powerful, right? There's just so much you can do with something like this, right? You can put it on basically like any mage. The thing to understand about this being reincarnated from Final Flash is Final Flash was only ever really effective on like 2 or 3 mages to begin with, right? Like Crystal Maiden can't really use Final Flash. Keeper of the Light could a bit in some situations, but it's a long channel. He'll often just kind of get popped right away. Final Flash was mostly for, your big caster Lich and maybe like your Razor and your Puck if you're in something like 6 mages, right? And so like even if you're on a mage path, if you find a single bracers, you can still put that on Lich, and it doesn't affect all your units, but it's still kind of like a lot of what Final Flash was doing to begin with. And they just took this ability and unlocked it for basically every alliance. I think this is going to have to get a little bit nerfed. Helm of the Undying might have to get a bit nerfed as well. I kind of expect this to go down to 3 seconds sometime soon. I don't know if it needs to go down by more than 1 second, but I think both of these items are probably a bit strong right now, is what I would say. So Bracers is just straight up good on anything that Refresher is good on. So big team fight ultis, something like Disruptor, as mentioned, like Lone Druid. And then Poaching Knife. Poaching Knife is a tier 3 offensive equipment. Equipped hero has a 30% chance of producing 1 gold when they kill an enemy. Attacks against units with less than 20% health, crit for 200. The second ability obviously pairs with the first, because when you get guaranteed crits against units with less than 20% health, you have a higher chance of being able to last hit an enemy, which means you can get the 1 gold a bit better. So it's kind of cheeky. Obviously, they rolled the scrappy alliance item into this equipable, and basically the idea is, at best, maybe you could put it on something like Medusa or Gyrocopter, I think would be the most effective. You really want attack speed with this ability to get like last hits. Like Medusa Split Shot does pretty well with this, all things considered. But honestly, if you have a Medusa, you might be better off putting an actual DPS item on her. It's kind of funny on Gyrocopter, I think, in theory, because it's a cute idea with Deadeye. You're going to have an easier time just like killing opponent units faster, possibly, increasing the odds of denying them a spell cast, which could be, a fight swinger easily. But ultimately, you can kind of run this with any comp. You just want it on like a fast attack speed hero, something that in the mid game is going to be getting you gold by doing like a big last hit AoE. That's going to be something like a Shadow Fiend or like a Beastmaster, right? Like a big AoE cleanup. And in the late game, that's when you're going to want to transition it into something that actually you want to have this like crit for, because the gold doesn't matter as much as just like winning the actual fights, right? At that point. And then the last item is Dawning of Bristol. This item is basically useless. Okay, I'm exaggerating a bit. There are situations where you can pick this. It is like a Warlock and Druid counter. The item system is going to lock you into this item sometimes, and sometimes it'll be worth running. Ultimately, I don't think this is a phenomenally useful item. It's probably the worst of the 4. I think it's quite weak, but there are niche situations where, you know, you'll be forced into it, or maybe you'll have weak options and you'll lean into it. And it can actually have a non-zero impact on the outcome of the game. You know, obviously this is symmetrical, so you're going to need to be aware of that. You can't even take this if you have something that wants to do a decent amount of healing. But against something like Druids or Warlocks, if there's a really heavy lobby for those, it can actually be kind of cheeky. I think this item would be cuter if it was something like tier 4 and if this number was bigger than 50%. Because like this is an item that you want to be picking late into the game when there's down to like 3 or 4 players. You can like look at those players and be like, okay, 2 of them are big Warlocks, 4 Warlocks each, or I don't know, something like that. And then be like, okay, I'm going to go for my 60 or 70 or whatever percent. Sort of counter to that. But even then, you can only do that in a really select situation, and you can't really have healing comp yourself. So I think that by design, this item is just pretty weak overall. Next up, we got removed items Cloak, Recruiter, Vicious Intent, and Wicked Intent. So Wicked Intent is like almost one of the Alliance items that just got rolled into Dawning Bristol. Vicious Intent is just gone. I guess Valve didn't like the ability to just knock players out like that. I honestly am kind of ambivalent about this. I didn't really necessarily hate Vicious Intent. It was a little annoying, but it was kind of designed to be annoying. So I could kind of see it either way on the issue. I'm not really sure how I feel about that. It's probably for the best, but it's a pretty close call. Recruiter was kind of like, not like OP. It was very powerful, situational, but it's something that might have just scaled a little bit too well with, you know, the new role stuff. And the Cloak is just kind of fundamentally useless. This change will make sense to you later down the road as we get to more of these changes.